What's up, Leafs fans, and welcome back to Leafs Digest. Now, in light of recent comments made by Doug Armstrong, the manager, general manager, constructor, however you want to put it, of Team Canada for the 2022 Olympics, he made some comments that were, I think they were fairly generic. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. We'll dive more into it as we go along here. But Leafs fans, the Leaf fan base and Leaf media seem to take this one pretty personally. It kind of got to the point where it was construed and taken as though these comments were directed at and towards Leafs players and an attack on the Leaf fan base in general. Goody, before I get your opinion on it, I'm just going to read basic breakdown on the comments that were said that he mentioned to Sportsnet and where these comments have gone, and we can start to get into it after. So, Doug Armstrong, the general manager of St. Louis, also the general manager of Hockey Canada for the Olympics, he said to Sportsnet, "How do you perform in the playoffs? And if your team doesn't get there, how do you perform in the World Championships? You want to see how guys perform when the light is brightest. If you haven't played important games in 4 to 5 years, it's a leap of faith that you're going to have the ability to get it done in those games." Right away, initial reaction, how do you take this one? Like, is this a just reaction for the fan base in Toronto to take this as an attack on them?
Before I give my on-spot reaction here, was that actually a question posed about the Maple Leafs, or was he speaking generally on his criteria for the team?
Yeah, I believe it was generally on the criteria of players to make the team.
Well, clearly it still affects the Leafs because we've had issues in meaningful games, which I don't necessarily blame a GM for considering. I do think at this point, you'd be robbing yourself not to put Mitch Marner on this roster, considering the strides he's made and also giving him more Olympic-sized ice. I think that plays right into his favor, opposed to someone like a Tom Wilson, who's on the other end of these rumors as potentially being included on Team Canada. I see Mitch Marner as the guy, and also the whole entire branding that we've had around him as someone that can't get stuff going in important games. I mean, he's still a champion at the 2016 World Juniors with Team Canada, and he's also a Mem Cup champ. So the only place he hasn't won is Toronto. So I get why there's a bit of an asterisk there on Leafs players, because it's been bad. The Philly, we've talked about it all the time. It's been bad. But to the same note, you're not going to go write off Austin Matthews if you're the United States. And then Mitch Marner is a guy who hangs out with Austin Matthews in terms of the points he gets in that season. So I think that Team Canada needs to give him a fair knock. Got to realize that it's only been in Toronto where this thing's been that Marner can't win. Everywhere else he showed out. He had like the Robert Thomas-esque rise to the NHL, right? World Jays, Mem Cup with London, getting it all done. But Mitch Marner, I think, should still get a fair knock. And I don't think Leafs fans should take this too personally. It's not like, I mean, it applies to us, so we're going to be offended on the inside. But I don't think Armstrong's reaching out here and trying to make a jab at Toronto. I think there's still a good chance he takes Leafs players. And I also don't blame him for saying the things he's saying, even if they're kind of hollow comments, and he's still going to go for skill.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that this was directed at Toronto players and Toronto in general. And that being said, if it was, there's different things that I kind of took away from this, right? So like in the first part of what he said, how do you perform in the playoffs? And if your team doesn't get there, how do you perform in the World Championships? Well, realistically, like the only player that I see this alluding to in terms of the guys who are kind of being considered in replacement of Marner or guys that could leap over him, it's really only comes down to Mangiapane. And Mangiapane is a guy who performed real well in last year's World Championships. He goes over there. He's the MVP in 11 games played. 7 games played. He had 7 goals, 4 assists, 11 points. I was getting that mixed up there. 7 games played, 11 points. He's the MVP of the World Championships. They win a gold medal. But then even like outside of that, you want to talk about, winning and how much he's done. That's the only place he's won. He hasn't won anywhere else. How has he done anything in the playoffs? Nope. In his career in Calgary, he's got 15 career playoff games played. He has 3 goals, 3 assists. And guess what? Calgary missed the playoffs last year, hence why he ends up at the World Championships. So there's like one guy in particular, when you break that down, you talk about World Championship performances. That's one guy I look at and say, okay, maybe he's talking about that guy getting a shot. But outside of that, has he won anything? I don't really know. So you can even just bring into certain situations, and it's kind of me taking away from the the spotlight of guys in Toronto on this one, but it's like if you're going to talk about guys winning, Barzal, Couturier, Scheifele, like have they done
McKinnon.
anything in recent years in terms of winning? Not particularly, right? So yeah, it's just one of those situations where do they get a pass because they just don't play in Toronto, so they get overlooked, and it's like, okay, now you can play on Team Canada despite the fact that you haven't won, but it's just because it's not in Toronto that you're losing.
Yeah, so it comes down to where, like, how much do we think you're worth skill-wise to just forget about the lack of resume and wins? Because you just said it yourself. Guys like McKinnon and Connor McDavid, they really don't have a lot to show yet. That's like a 1-2
Yeah, that's also
league.
another thing to point out there is like they've got World Junior pedigree, but even McDavid didn't win
does
Mem
Mitch
Cup.
Marner. Yeah, exactly. And I think Mitch Marner was like by far the most prolific player in the OHL the year they did that. How many points did he have? It was ridiculous. I forget the number, but a ridiculous amount of points. I think, remember when I said 140 points when we were talking about Marner in the season project? Just a crazy comment. I think that's because in the OHL year that he got drafted after, the Leafs drafted him and he went back to London. That year, he had 140
that was the year
points.
they won the Mem Cup.
That's where I got the number from. But anyways, Marner's like he's played great on those biggest stages. So to me, I really don't think that this Leafs issue, which has been like even like look at Phil Kessel, another overly scrutinized Leafs player who is consistently top 5 in points. He goes somewhere else, and like this guy was scrutinized from like every angle and immediately contributes to a cup winning team. It's been a Leafs issue, not a Mitch. Okay, Mitch Marner's involved. I'm not exempting him. But this cannot be an overriding bias in evaluating him right now.
Well, and then the other thing is you look at different guys that people, part of where the speculation is coming is that a guy like Tom Wilson may get a jump over Mitch Marner when Doug Armstrong makes some comments like that. But I mean, yes, Tom Wilson did win on a big stage. He was a Stanley Cup champion, but in 21 games played that year in the playoffs, he had 5 goals, 10 assists. Played pretty well. He was an integral part of that, not just from point production, but from what he actually brings. So yes, fair enough. That being said, you go onto the international stage, you might risk losing a guy like that because of his history in terms of the type of plays that he makes physically. But I mean, that's where you take the good and the bad and you determine whether or not that's worth it for your team. Now, I don't necessarily know. The one guy that I can truly sit here and say after these comments may really seriously jump ahead, and it's for numerous reasons. It's the guy that we kind of mentioned a couple weeks back, Anthony Cirelli. Now, you want to talk about winning at all levels here. Anthony Cirelli, let's just run through this. So first of all, he's 6 foot, 192 pounds. He can play the center or the wing. He plays with Steven Stamkos. And guess who his coach is in the NHL? Yes, John Cooper. Who is John Cooper going to be coaching? Team Canada at the Olympics. So then you move on from there. He is a Selke nominee as one of the best defensive players in the NHL at the forward position. He's a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. He is a World Junior Championship silver medalist, a Memorial Cup champion, and by the way, they won 2-1 in overtime, and he scored both goals in that game. He is a 2-time OHL champion and a world champion silver medalist. Like, this guy is one guy that when I hear those comments, I say, okay, maybe that's the guy who gets the spot. When you talk about the other guys of Tom Wilson, Mangiapane, Zack Hyman, it just doesn't do it for me as guys who could jump ahead of Mitch Marner. But a guy who I would give serious consideration to on this is a guy like Anthony Cirelli to jump over Marner, Tavares, etc.
Yeah, all the reasons that you're giving me make a lot of sense. And the same reason that we thought Zack Hyman might have creeped onto this roster and still might is from a comfort standpoint to give to Connor McDavid. And from that, if we're playing to that kind of need on the team, then I think John Cooper would also have a pretty good right to say, well, speaking of comfort, this is the guy that I've done the whole entire like cup winning thing with. He's done it without me as well. Anthony Cirelli is definitely a candidate that's going to have his hand in there. And I don't know, but there's a lot of great guys. And another person I wanted to bring up, and Cirelli could totally do it. And I got to point out, I know you're rooting for Cirelli to go do it, pushing that agenda.
Went to my high school.
Exactly. Been a guest on the other pod before. So shouts out to Cirelli, man. That'd be cool to see him get the nod. But Do you think the comments of Doug Armstrong are at all going to pertain to John Tavares? And even though he hasn't done it in the NHL, having that previous Olympic and World Juniors experience with Canada, do you think when Doug Armstrong talks about guys who have played in those games and been there, he puts John Tavares in that category?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I think I broke his statement down into two different sections. The first one is what I just referred to, where I thought, okay, maybe he's kind of talking about like a guy like Mangiapane, and the second part of it was, this is where I came across to me as he could potentially be taking a shot at a guy like Tavares here, where it's him saying, you want to see how guys perform in the light is the brightest. If you haven't played important games in 4 to 5 years, it's a leap of faith that you're going to have the ability to get it done in those games. So the one thing I even think about is the last time Tavares played in the Olympics, he got injured in the the pre-tournament games, didn't play in the Olympics, and then was injured when he returned home. So it's like he hasn't even really got to perform on that stage necessarily. He was obviously a World Junior hero, really, when
Legend,
he played for Canada. A legend.
I forgot about the injury though. That's a good point.
Yeah, but aside from that, he's won in his career one playoff round. And it's just one of those things where you're like, okay, maybe that is the jab. Maybe it's a guy like Tavares where you're looking. Marner is a younger guy, a fresh guy who's putting up an insane amount of points. And he might be a guy who's farther ahead on this list than Tavares. And then when Doug Armstrong is looking down the list, he's looking towards the bottom, and he's going to say, okay, I have to make a distinction and make a pick between Scheifele, Couturier, Barzal, Tavares, Stamkos. I don't even know. Like, you look, Cirelli, Mangiapane, he's going to look across and say, okay, if these guys can all give me essentially the same thing, now you're going to start eliminating, okay, Tavares hasn't won anything, gone. Maybe that's where this kind of comment comes in, as opposed to actually a knock on a guy like Marner.
Yeah. No, there's a bunch of angles you could see this comment from. And when you say in the past 4 to 5 years, well, even if he had played pretty much exactly 4 to 5 years ago was the last time that Canada's men's Olympic team was competing. So we're looking in even a shorter window than that. So his comments would pertain likely to anything that's gone on in the NHL, which for the Leafs has been virtually nothing, literally nothing outside of the first round. The one last thing I'll say about John Tavares is, are we putting any stock into the fact that Lululemon had him do a Team Canada photo shoot? Is there any kind of stock in that? Because it does feel weird that they give a former gold medalist that, who's like very much so on the bubble right now, for making this year's team.
No, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I think I am putting stock in that. Like, I've got to be so straight up. I think I am, because it's, as you said, that is a really weird thing to do. Like, you could have gone to Nathan McKinnon or Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid, and those are shoe-in locks. And I think we're Lululemon and Team Canada, because let's be very clear here, Team Canada would likely have had to approve of this to have John Tavares be featured in that. They probably looked at it and were like, well, in Toronto, and hey, I mean, I don't say this as like a pat on the back. Oh, like, we're Toronto fans. Like, oh, we got the biggest market. But when it comes to Canada and the pull that the NHL teams in Canada are going to have, like, the Leafs are going to have a huge pull. And having a guy from Toronto, the captain of Toronto, showing off the Team Canada gear, like, that's going to have a little bit more pull than, say, going to Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh and having him wear it. Or it's not necessarily the type of player they are, but where they play. And I think that this is something Canada and Lululemon would have had to work on together to have this happen. I don't think Lululemon separately went to Tavares. I maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of where I see it coming from. So I do put a little bit of stock into it. I'm not going to lie with that.
Yeah, I think you need to obviously notice it a little bit, but the latter half of your statement there, I do tend to agree that just being situated in Toronto, the hub of hockey, being from here, the captain, team's really doing good right now. Like, it's a great place to market from. I do get why, irrelevant to Team Canada, choosing Johnny T would have been a good idea, but a little part of me still wonders. Clearly this is like it's a visual statement here. Johnny T repping Team Canada, or like Team Canada Olympians. Probably not too much stock, but a little bit. We'll see how that develops. I feel like, just talking a bit about, at this point, Team Canada is stacked no matter what. And if you're trying to fill in the roster with guys right at the end, I would almost maybe just like roll the dice with Marner then, because even though Steven Stamkos doing really great, he's already been there, done that. The current ceiling of where Mitch Marner can play is a lot higher, I think, than where Stammer can play right now. And I'm not saying Stammer isn't a great, like, borderline, generational player in his own right, and he's got the wins to back it up, the cups. I just feel like Mitchell Marner is a guy who could explode for an ungodly amount of assists and maybe a few timely goals and highlight real stuff. Whereas, like if you,
and it is being played on NHL ice, by the way.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay. That helps out the Tom Wilson factor a little bit, but generally I still think you would probably just like buy the Mitch Marner lottery ticket. And if it doesn't hit, you still have a team that's responsible two-way players absolutely everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And part of it too is they carry extra forwards. Like they don't go with 12. They have an extra couple of guys that come along. So maybe it allows for a guy like Wilson to slot in there, and Marner doesn't have to bump out, or Cirelli comes with them, and Marner still stays in that lineup. But as far as the important takeaways go from these comments, I do not think it was directed at Leafs fans. I think Leafs fans and the Leafs players, or I don't think it was directed at Leafs players. I think Leafs fans take a personal, because we look at our team and we get all upset and all poopy pants about the fact that our team hasn't won anything, and anytime anything about like that is said, it's immediately, oh, this is about us. Like, let's take a second here and take our self-centered ways off, turn that off for a second, and just look back, because you know who else hasn't won anything? It's, as Josh said, Nathan McKinnon, Connor McDavid, Mark Scheifele, Couturier, Huberdeau, Mark Stone. Like, these guys also haven't won anything. Mangiapane hasn't won anything. And Leafs fans getting all upset saying, oh, Zach Hyman's going to make it after these comments, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Guess how much Zach Hyman has won? Just as much, if not less, than Mitch Marner. Like, actually less. No World Juniors, no Memorial Cups, no OHL, no NCAA, nothing.
And they played on the same line too. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, but Marner was the reason." No, they played on the same line. The whole line struggled.
So pump the brakes on that. If there is anyone, my final point on all of it would be, if there is anyone who could potentially slot into this lineup that would be kind of an outside non-superstar name, it would be Anthony Cirelli. That is my like sleeper pick. I don't even know if it's a sleeper at this point. Like, this guy is nasty, but it's just, you want to talk about, he's a big body. He plays real well defensively. He's a really relied upon player for John Cooper, who, as I mentioned, is the coach of Team Canada. He's won two OHL championships. He's won the Memorial Cup. He scored the game-winning goal. He's a World Junior silver medalist, World Champion silver medalist, like two-time Stanley Cup champion. This guy does have winning pedigree. He's a great player who is well regarded with his team.
You're pushing the Cirelli agenda hard right now.
I just think it's like he's the guy, if you're going to look and say, oh, an outside name's going to make it. I think that's the outside name that needs to be narrowed in on. Not necessarily because I like want him to make it, but because I think like if people are trying to quote unquote think outside the box, that's probably the guy that's going to be looked at here.
No, your reasons are fair. I agree. I think he'll get looked at definitely, and especially the comfort factor with John Cooper, the fact they've won. Makes sense to me. I think they'll definitely look at it. I still have a weird gut feeling that somehow Zach Hyman ends up on this roster. I just like Canadian hockey in general. I think that we praise that kind of blue collar approach, and we always want to send the message of you do the little things right first, and no one hammers that home more than Zach Hyman. I got a weird feeling. It's definitely on the bubble, guys. I'm not saying this should happen, but a weird hunch that it might end up with Zach Hyman representing Canada at the Olympics.
All right, Leafs fans. Well, let us know what you think in the comments, whether or not Zach Hyman, Anthony Cirelli, Tom Wilson, Mangiapane are going to be guys that make this roster ahead of Leafs players like Mitch Marner, John Tavares, and more specifically, let us know in these comments if you think Doug Armstrong's comments were an attack on the Toronto Maple Leafs players, more specifically Riley, Tavares, Marner. Let us know how you guys took away from these comments, what you took away, how you felt about him making them, and if you think Marner, Tavares, Riley still got a shot at making this team. Make sure you like and comment on this video, letting us know what you think. And before you go, make sure you hit subscribe on this channel. We're on the road to 2,000 subscribers. So hit that subscribe button as you leave. We appreciate you guys taking the time to watch along with us. Leafs fans, keep believing.
Signing off.